My husband's family wanted my money. They never expected my final move. I never thought my marriage would turn into a battlefield over money. But here I was, standing in my living room, surrounded by my husband's family, as they demanded what they believed was their rightful share of my finances. The air was thick with tension, their eyes filled with entitlement, while my husband, the man I had vowed to love and trust, sat silently, unwilling to defend me. It started with small hints, his mother casually suggesting that since I was earning well, I should contribute more to the household expenses. His sister, who always had a way of twisting words, would comment on how lucky my husband was to have a wife who could support the family so he didn't have to stress about work. I ignored it at first, thinking they meant well. But then the demands became blatant. They wanted me to pay off my brother-in-law's debts. They insisted I should help buy a bigger house so the whole family could live comfortably. And when I refused, the manipulation turned vicious. "You're selfish," his mother spat at me one evening. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" The audacity was overwhelming. They saw my success as their inheritance, and my resistance as betrayal. But what they didn't know was that I had a plan, a final move they never saw coming. Before I met my husband, I had built my life from the ground up. Coming from a modest background, I had worked tirelessly to establish my career. I wasn't handed success, I had fought for it, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and at times, relationships, to ensure my future was secure. I had always imagined that when I got married, I would find a partner who respected and cherished that journey, not one who would let his family see me as an endless source of wealth. We met in college, where he was charming, ambitious, and full of dreams. At the time, I admired his aspirations and saw us as equals, two individuals striving for a better future. We married young, full of hope and promise, believing we were building something meaningful together. But over time, I noticed the stark difference between our realities. While I continued to push forward in my career, my husband became complacent. He had dreams but no drive, and ideas but no execution. His family, seeing my success, subtly began shifting responsibilities onto me. What started as small favors soon turned into full-blown expectations. His mother was the mastermind behind it all. She had a way of making me feel guilty if I didn't comply. If I refused to help financially, I was reminded of how they had welcomed me into their family, how much they had supported my husband, and how it was now our duty to ensure their comfort. His sister was no different, constantly finding ways to involve me in her financial troubles, whether it was a temporary loan or covering an emergency expense. Despite my discomfort, I remained silent, hoping that my husband would see what was happening and put a stop to it. But he never did. Instead, he became an accomplice in their scheme, feeding into their beliefs that my money was their security. The breaking point came when they suggested I should transfer part of my savings into a family fund that my mother-in-law would manage. That was when I realized they weren't going to stop until they had taken everything from me. I knew then that I had to act. If they thought I was going to sit back and let them drain me dry, they were sorely mistaken. I had worked too hard to be manipulated like this. And so, I began to plan my escape, one that would leave them reeling and ensure that they would never exploit me again. My husband, Daniel, had always been the golden child of his family. His mother, Evelyn, had raised him with the belief that he was destined for greatness, even though he never quite lived up to those expectations. He was charming, easygoing, and knew how to talk his way out of responsibilities. When we first met, I saw his charisma as a strength, but over time, I realized it was a shield, one that protected him from ever having to step up. Evelyn, his mother, was a force to be reckoned with. She carried herself with an air of entitlement, convinced that her son was too good for the struggles of everyday life. She never worked a day in her life and had always relied on others, first her husband, and then, after his passing, her children. She saw me as a convenient financial cushion, someone who could ensure her and her family's continued comfort without them having to make any real effort. Daniel's sister, Olivia, was cut from the same cloth. She had a penchant for dramatics and a never-ending list of financial crises. There was always some excuse: an unexpected medical bill, car trouble, a sudden loss of income. She played the victim well, knowing exactly how to spin a story to elicit sympathy and, more importantly, financial help. Her biggest strength was emotional manipulation, and she wielded it like a weapon. Then there was Daniel's younger brother, Ethan. Unlike the rest of the family, he was more of an observer than an active participant in their schemes. He was quiet, reserved, and seemingly indifferent to the financial chaos around him. However, he never intervened and never spoke up against their actions, making him complicit in his way. At the heart of it all was Daniel himself, the man I had once believed would be my life partner. When we married, I thought we were a team. I worked long hours, climbed the corporate ladder, and built a stable future for us. Meanwhile, Daniel drifted from one failed venture to another, always full of ideas, but never following through. And every time he failed, his mother and sister were there to remind me that, as his wife, it was my duty to support him and, by extension, them. At first, I tried to set boundaries, but they were ignored, and twisted into accusations of selfishness. If I said no, I was ungrateful. If I hesitated, I was cold-hearted. Daniel, instead of standing by me, stood by them. He had been raised to believe that his family came first, and he refused to acknowledge that their demands were unreasonable. The moment I realized he would always choose them over me was the moment everything changed. The financial drain wasn't just about money, it was about power and control. They wanted me to be dependent, to be too entangled to ever leave. But I wasn't like them. I had worked too hard to let them take everything from me. So, I started preparing. I moved money into accounts they didn't know about. I documented every request, every demand, every manipulation. I made a plan, one they would never see coming. Because if they thought I was just going to hand over my hard-earned wealth and let them dictate my life, they had another thing coming. It started with small, seemingly innocent requests: Daniel asking me to cover a minor bill because he was waiting on a payment, Olivia needing help with rent for just this month, Evelyn hinting that the family car was breaking down and wouldn't it be nice if we helped out. At first, I obliged, convincing myself that this was what the family did. But as time went on, the requests turned into expectations, and expectations turned into demands. One evening, I came home exhausted from work to find Evelyn and Olivia sitting in my living room, sipping tea as if they owned the place. Daniel looked nervous, avoiding eye contact. I knew something was wrong. Olivia spoke first. "We need a favor," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Mom's been stressed lately, and we were thinking it would be best if we all moved in together. It's just too much for her to live alone." My stomach twisted. I had already contributed to their expenses more times than I could count, and now they wanted to invade my home. I forced a polite smile and shook my head. "That won't be possible." Evelyn set down her cup with a sharp clink. "Why not? You have this big house, and we're family. You wouldn't even notice we're here." I turned to Daniel, hoping for support, but he shifted uncomfortably. "It could be a good thing," he murmured. "Family should stick together." That was the first real confrontation. And it only got worse from there. A week later, Olivia showed up at my office. It was a calculated move, she knew I wouldn't cause a scene. She sat across from my desk, feigning concern. "Listen, I know you're still thinking about the house thing, but there's another issue. I need $20,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. "For what?" "An investment opportunity." I laughed, shaking my head. "No." Her expression darkened. "I didn't want to bring this up, but Mom's been saying you've changed. That you don't care about this family anymore." I told her she was wrong, but I don't know, maybe she's right. I clenched my fists beneath my desk. I had given, and yet, the moment I refused, I was the villain. The guilt trips continued. When I refused to buy Evelyn a new car, she conveniently fell ill and needed financial support for medical tests. When I didn't agree to lend Olivia money, She started spreading rumors to the extended family that I was controlling Daniel, keeping him from helping them. And the worst part? Daniel never once defended me. The final straw came when I discovered a transfer from our joint account, $10,000 gone overnight. I confronted Daniel that evening. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. I was going to tell you. You gave them money without telling me? My voice shook with rage. They needed it. I needed it. That was our savings. He exhaled heavily. You're overreacting. That was it. I had been patient, understanding, and supportive. And for what? To be used, manipulated, and stolen from? My heart hardened. If they wanted to take advantage of me, they were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't forget. That night, I initiated the next step of my plan. I moved my savings to an account they couldn't touch. I hired a lawyer and started preparing for what I knew had to happen. Because I wasn't just walking away, I was making sure they would never use me again. The night of the final confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. I had been biding my time, meticulously preparing for this moment, and now, everything was in place. It was a Sunday evening when I asked Daniel to call his mother and sister over. I told him I wanted to have a serious discussion about boundaries, but in reality, I was ready to set the record straight once and for all. As they settled in the living room, I could already sense their smug confidence. They believed they had won, and that I would cave in just like every other time. Evelyn sat in her usual position, straight-backed and expectant, while Olivia was already on her phone, disinterested in anything I had to say. Daniel sat next to me, tense but unwilling to fully grasp what was coming. I took a deep breath. I want to talk about finances. Specifically, my finances. Evelyn scoffed. Oh, here we go again. You always make such a big deal out of nothing. We're family. What's yours is ours. I smiled. Actually, no. What's mine is mine. And I have proof that you've all been taking advantage of me. I pulled out the neatly compiled folder from the table in front of me, flipping it open to reveal the bank statements, text message screenshots, and records of every transaction I had been manipulated into making. Olivia finally looked up, eyes narrowing. What is this? This, I said, my voice steady, is evidence. Evidence of every single time you have guilt, coerced, or outright stolen from me under the pretense of family obligations. Daniel shifted beside me. Come on, babe. That's a bit dramatic. I turned to him sharply. No, Daniel. What's dramatic is finding out that my husband has been stealing from me to fund his family's constant demands. What's dramatic is how you've let them leech off me without a second thought. Evelyn's face hardened. So what? Are you trying to humiliate us? Is this what you think of your family? Family? I let out a bitter laugh. A real family supports one another, not drains them dry. You've never cared about me, only what I could provide. But that ends tonight. I reached for the second document in my folder, the official papers I had prepared with my lawyer. This is an official notice. As of tomorrow, my accounts are separate, and all joint funds will be split accordingly. I've also removed Daniel's access to my finances. You will not get another cent from me. Daniel's face went pale. You can't be serious. Oh, I am. And one more thing, I pulled out a final envelope and slid it across the table toward him. That's my lawyer's card. Because if you think I'm staying married to someone who enables this kind of abuse, you're out of your mind. I'm filing for divorce. The silence in the room was deafening. Olivia looked like she wanted to scream. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed, but for once, she had no words. And Daniel? He just sat there, stunned, as if he had never considered that I would fight back. I stood up, straightening my shoulders. I suggest you all leave now. Evelyn's eyes burned with fury. You'll regret this. I smiled. No, I won't. And with that, I walked away, finally free from the chains they had tried so desperately to wrap around me. The moment the door shut behind them, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The weight of their manipulation, the constant pressure to give more, to be more for people who only saw me as a resource, was gone. I stood in the silence of my living room, staring at the scattered papers and empty teacups they had left behind. It was symbolic in a way, proof of their presence, yet also a reminder that they no longer had control over me. I had spent so much of my marriage being the provider, the fixer, the one who held everything together while Daniel and his family took advantage of my generosity. But now? Now, I was done. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. Daniel called and texted incessantly, begging for another chance. He claimed he had been blinded by his family's influence, that he hadn't realized how deeply they had embedded themselves in our marriage. But it was too little, too late. His apologies didn't erase the years of neglect, the betrayal, or the financial strain I had endured. Evelyn, of course, played the victim. She spun stories to extended family members, painting me as a cruel, ungrateful woman who had abandoned them after all they had done for me. But I didn't care anymore. I no longer needed to justify my choices to anyone. Those who truly knew me, who understood my struggle, stood by my side. And those who believed Evelyn's lies? They were never truly my allies, to begin with. Despite the turmoil, I found solace in the quiet moments of reclaiming my life. I redecorated the house, removing every trace of Daniel's family. I went back to the hobbies and passions I had abandoned in my attempt to appease them. I even took a trip, one I had always postponed because there was always someone else's crisis to handle. Standing on a beach far from home, feeling the warm sun on my face, I realized how much of myself I had lost in that marriage. But more importantly, I realized that I was ready to start over. Financially, I was secure. I had taken back control of my accounts and ensured that every penny I earned was mine alone. Legally, the divorce was in motion, and though it was painful, it was necessary. Emotionally, I was healing, piece by piece. I had spent too long giving away my peace for the sake of people who would never do the same for me. One evening, months after the confrontation, I received one last message from Daniel. It was short, almost pitiful. I never thought you'd leave. I thought you'd always stay. I stared at the words for a long moment before deleting the message. That was his biggest mistake, believing that I would always be there to clean up after him, to endure the mistreatment, to give until there was nothing left. But I had finally done what they never expected, I chose myself. And I had never felt stronger. As the months passed, I found myself embracing a newfound sense of peace and independence. Life no longer revolved around appeasing others or sacrificing my well-being for the sake of those who only saw me as a resource. Instead, I focused on myself, on my happiness, my ambitions, and my future. I moved into a new home, one that felt entirely my own. There were no lingering memories of manipulation, no ghosts of past betrayals haunting the space. It was mine, and every inch of it reflected the person I had become, strong, resilient, and unapologetically free. My career flourished without the burden of financial leeches draining me. I took on projects I was passionate about, invested in opportunities that truly mattered, and for the first time in years, I saved money for myself without feeling obligated to share it. With every step forward, I realized just how much of my potential had been stifled by the toxic environment I had been trapped in for so long. Daniel eventually stopped reaching out. Perhaps he finally accepted that I was never coming back, or maybe he had simply moved on to his next enabler. Either way, it no longer mattered. His absence was a blessing, a confirmation that I had made the right decision. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage, rebuilding relationships that had been overshadowed by my struggles. I surrounded myself with people who uplifted and supported me, rather than those who sought to take advantage of me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reflected on how far I had come. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and loss, but I had also reclaimed my life, my confidence, and my sense of self. I had once feared that leaving Daniel and his family would leave me empty and alone. But now, I knew the truth, I had never been more whole. And this was just the beginning. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this: you don't owe anyone your peace, your success, or your happiness. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I know many of you have faced similar struggles, whether with family, relationships, or toxic expectations that weigh you down. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to break free from a manipulative situation? How did you find the strength to move forward? Drop a comment below and share your experience. Let's support and uplift one another. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another empowering story. Your support means the world to me and helps spread messages of resilience and strength to those who need it most. Remember, you have the power to reclaim your life. No one can take that from you unless you let them. So choose yourself, stand tall, and keep moving forward. This is just the beginning of a new, better chapter. Until next time, take care and stay strong.